Johnny, do you want to introduce yourself and let everybody know what you're experiencing at the moment? Just give an overview of what's happening.
Sure, I can do that. What we're finding is that the initial period of coronavirus, the stage 1, if you like, is now through the system. We're now working this through, and people are still now putting their heads over the parapet and actually seeing what life is like during COVID, but more importantly, post-COVID. And we're starting to try and imagine what the environment is going to look like when COVID moves out of the equation and the lockdown starts to finish. And we're trying to look at what sort of practices we're going to be open, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, and trying to imagine what we need to do to get from here to there. Now, we're still in a position of great uncertainty. One of the biggest questions is, how long is this all going to last? Are we going to be out of lockdown in 3 weeks, 6 weeks? That creates a huge amount of uncertainty for a practice owner and also for the practice staff and what you need to do. For NHS practices, there's a greater degree of uncertainty, such as it is, in that what sort of support the NHS is offering and what they're likely to do. The new arrangements that are under discussion, even as we speak, I know this from personal experience, even as we speak, they are trying to work out what the payment is going to be to NHS and mixed practices during the period of lockdown and before we get up and running again, and exactly how that's going to dovetail into the financial support which the NHS has been giving. For private practices, things unfortunately are a little bit clearer in that there isn't any support, certainly not from the NHS. But for a private practice, we've got to really start looking at what we have on the agenda for the patients, how are we going to get the patients back in again, what should we be doing with our patients in the meantime, and what should they see at the point of reopening, whatever reopening is defined. No doubt we'll go into that a little bit later on as questions will come through. But everyone should be looking, I think now, is what it's going to look and feel like on day one in the brave new world after coronavirus.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think if we can start taking questions. Shimon, you are unmuted, so would you like to go first with your question, please?
Oh, hi Johnny, great seeing you.
How do you?
So as you probably know, at the moment I work as an associate.
Yes.
So we had to shut down like over a month ago, and we're looking forward to reopen. And how do you think it will impact our patients?
Yes.
Our future patients?
I think the patients will be concerned when they come back to the practice. And there are two things I think we should look at when we look at patients. The first one is how the patients feel when they come to the practice. Are they going to be worried that they will be infected? Are they going to be worried that the infection is not there? And is the practice going to do as much as it possibly can to give security to the patients as they come through the physical patient journey through the practice itself? So that's one thing. I'll come back to that possibly in a little bit more detail later. The second way that will affect the dental practice is the sorts of treatments that the patients, with which the patients are presenting. we're going to have probably 2 months, more likely to be 3, and possibly even more, where routine dentistry has not been an issue. It's not been taking place. So people have not been going to the hygienist, people have not been possibly looking after their oral health as well as they may have done in the past. So the sorts of things which patients are going to be presenting with are going to be different. So for a dentist, you're going to have, in my view, a little hump of different type of work that a practice normally would have. And we need to gear up for that, for a lot of routine work which has been ignored. And also the idea of scheduling sort of more specialist work may well have to take a back seat to some of this more routine stuff until we get this out of the equation. I don't think a practice will settle down into a normal treatment pattern for 6 months after we come out of lockdown. I'm not going to touch at this stage whether lockdown happens all at once or over a period of time. I personally think it's going to happen over a period of time. So this pushes this whole period of looking at treatments and treatment plans that are presenting to the practice quite differently. And we need to organize the practice and the clinical staff accordingly. Does that start to answer the question?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's absolutely, it makes sense. So I believe the next few months we'll need to concentrate more after we finish with the lockdown. So we'll need to concentrate more on kind of emergency treatments.
It's sort of emergency treatments, yes, I would agree. But emergencies which are acute treatment, which has become acute because it's been ignored.
Yeah,
that's it. We also, the first part of that particular answer was really to do with how we organize things within the practice itself. And a lot of that will possibly bring into question how the practice is physically organized, what sort of equipment and this type of thing that we will need to have into the practice in order to make the physical patient journey feel more secure, such as the air conditioning elements and so on, with that removing of the aerosol from the treatment, the space of the treatment, this type of thing. All of that has got some costs effect. And unfortunately, we're going to be stuck with that. And I don't think there's going to be the assistance from the government.
Have you seen any of your clients sort of making investments in preparing their practices for social distancing and putting in additional equipment to deal with any treatments that create those aerosol droplets that are potentially going to cause problem?
Yes, we have. They've started looking at that. Some of them are very, very pleased that they've already got some of that equipment, but not many. But many more are now looking at what they should do and how they should do it. The whole disinfectant sterilization aspect of the practice suddenly becomes very important. All the bits and pieces that you need to make that happen. And it's not always big kit. It's sometimes just little kit. It's like multiple sets of equipment, multiple sets of consumables are all going to be needed there. Because the time for the sterilization and so on isn't going to be, within a particular practice, you're not going to have all the time to do that. For the simple reason, if we're going to spread the length of time between one patient leaving and another person coming in, we're not going to have the time to do what we need to with the different consumables. And it may well be we have different surgery spaces used for different things, therefore you need double the amount. You need to multiply up the consumables that you need in that particular space. I can also see some practices with space which is not quite surgery space, but could be, starting to bring that space into operation as surgery space so that they can get try and increase the throughput of patients through the practice. Because if we all did what the NHS England is saying we're going to do, then we're going to have less than half the number of patients coming through our practices every day, and that is not financially viable. So we need to be looking at this and working smart at this.
Okay, when you say what NHS England are expecting practices to do, would you just be able to give a brief rundown on exactly what that is for people who might not know?
They are they're simply talking about increasing the time between patients and keeping the patients separate from each other.
Okay.
And this patient space from normally be waiting room to chair to front desk and out they go. That's not going to be adequate anymore. We're going to need sufficient time in between patients, not just for the droplets to clear, but also for the sterilization, the full sterilization process, which will now be required to take place. And that's going to add more and more time. And the patients, of course, may well have to go out a different way so that patients leaving a sterilized place don't go past a patient coming in who hasn't yet been sterilized, shall we say. I think I used the wrong word there, but I think you know what I mean.
Okay. So, Shimon, is there anything else that you wanted Johnny to go into, or does that sort of answer your question?
Not at the moment, actually. It was quite clear.
Okay.
Yeah, Johnny, I just wanted to pick your brains about, so effectively we're a relatively new, solely private practice. And over the past 10 months, effectively, we have been building up our client base from squat. And unfortunately, the current situation has kind of set us back on our trajectory quite significantly.
Quite frightening.
One of the areas that concerns me is we had made quite considerable progress with our plan patients, and that is all preventative dentistry. And I just kind of wanted to pick your brains in understanding where you think that might be going and over what time period, because my concern is for us, that's the only thing that provides us at the moment with a degree of surety. And I'm kind of asking myself the question, well, we've put it off for the last 6-8 weeks, but there's only a certain amount of time that you can put that off for before people are not able to receive the service that they would ordinarily as part of those routine dentistry aspects. So it's really just to pick up on the whole plan aspect and where you think that is going to be and what impact, etc., the next phases might have.
Yeah, okay. It depends on which plan you've got. If you've gone with a high-end plan or a basic plan or a flexible plan, and as you'll be aware, the plan providers offer different things across the piece. It might be worthwhile it might be worthwhile speaking to the plan provider and ask what flexibility can be done within that. But that it comes down to the plan itself, the plan provider on that. With regard to the patients themselves and so on, most patients understand the situation. They understand the place that we are and the limit to what you can do. There is no substitute for just spending the time getting on the phone, talking to them, talking all the time, reassuring them that if there is an issue, there is some sort of a UDC or some sort of help available to them. I'll just speak on that sort of in a moment, because I'm hearing of some private practices grouping together and forming their own UDCs in spite of what NHS England might want to do. So that's something which I think we're going to see a little bit more of that, and it's not supposed to happen, but it's starting to happen, because exactly, Saqib, as you've said, the patients want to see someone. They want more than talking, and sometimes all you can do at the moment is reassurance. The telephone triage aspect is something, again, it's been received reasonably well with by patients up to now, because patients understand that they can't have the face-to-face treatment that they are wanting. So they're accepting the telephone triage, and for the moment, that's working okay. As time goes on, though, that is not going to be adequate, particularly if someone has got a problem and the problem is just getting worse and worse. The UDC is the only place you can go from that. Under the CDO's guidance, we're not supposed to be seeing patients. That causes a problem, which is why I think some of the private dentists are just grouping together and saying, look, we've got to look after our patients. We're going to do this, come what may.
Does that answer your...
Thank you, that's really, really helpful.
I'm afraid it's not a great answer because I don't have one.
No, and the biggest issue for us at the moment is, as a squat practice, we took the decision that we would run an in-house plan rather than be subject to a plan provider as such. One, we've got the flexibility that we can do as we need to rather than rely on anybody else, but it's also challenging on the other side, whereas I'm kind of asking myself the question, well, what can I reasonably offer these patients now, given that we've worked so hard to attract them and it was working so well for us? There comes a point where, at the moment we've put them into the kind of longer grass, and we're having conversation. We're saying, look, we're going to try and book you in for July, etc. If it changes, we'll let you know, etc. But I'm almost starting to develop a little bit of anxiety around the fact that come July, if we're not in a better position, what am I going to realistically say to them? But I suppose that's just kind of where we are, and recognizing that we can change what we can change and we can't change everything.
I think we could be back offering relatively low levels of treatment and reassurance and so on come July. It's impossible to say, but my feeling is, within the industry, speaking to people, possibly that a month from now we're going to start making noises about reopening soon. At that point, some types of non-invasive practice which doesn't have aerosol, which is pretty much most of it, but at least we're starting to get people into dental practices, possibly by the end of June.
Johnny, I'm liking you even more now.
I'm not sure that that's only my instinct. That's all. But I think we might be at least having started. And as you know, Saqib, if you get the patients into the practice, even if they're only seeing a hygienist, or if they're seeing you and you're not doing anything, but you're just poking around with them and you've got a big mask on and a visor, they're going to feel better. And a lot of it, that's what a lot of this is about. This is just going to be a slow shift through. But my heart goes out to you with opening a squat and then having this hit. That's a problem. As your bank manager, your best friend, because he should be.
Yeah. The bank of dad.
But the finance at this is going to be the crucial thing that we work with. Squat moving forward has its own problems. But bear in mind, we're talking about these things. This is going to last, let's say it's the end of June, let's say it's the end of July. In the long-term scheme of things, that's a relatively short space of time, unless you've just opened a squat. That's a relatively short period of time to take that, that trough and try and work through that trough in the long-term scheme of the practice. And I think we've got to look up on this and look at the positives such as they are, and not dwell on the negatives. Otherwise, you'd be off the Humber Bridge or the Severn Bridge or the Queen Elizabeth Bridge, whichever one is handiest, the Tay Bridge.
Julian has said that he's in a loud room, but he sent a question over email. So, Johnny, he says, hi, I have a mixed race practice with about 40% NHS contract and have been considering going fully private for many reasons. Do you think now is a bad time, especially with all the public affection for the NHS, or is it a good opportunity and a necessity with all the extra costs that we're going to be lumbered with?
As far as the extra costs are concerned, we're all expecting to have a hike up in PPE equipment, general disinfectant sterilization equipment, and the moving of patients around the practice and how the practices will move. That's going to happen. We're going to have those costs, whether or not NHS or private. So in many ways, that bit of it doesn't matter. Is now a good time to go private in its entirety rather than with the NHS? I would like, part of me says it's a bad time to go fully private now because the NHS is providing some sort of support. However, the support that the NHS will be giving once it's agreed that's going to happen April, May, June, or whenever the lockdown continues, will be less than what they're actually paying, physically paying now on a monthly basis. That's cash flow only. Coming out of this, I believe that the NHS will start to look very closely at the contract arrangements. I know the CDO is very keen to put a new contract in place. She's been talking about this in 2021, 2022. It wouldn't surprise me if, as we come out of this, she makes a decision to actually bring this forward, and rather than try and go back to a bit of a car crash trying to make the existing type contracts work after lockdown, whether she starts the process and says, right, we'll start bringing in a new contract now, which is to do with an element of capitation within it, maybe 10 or 15% capitation payment, the rest of it some sort of adjusted UDA version. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. However, this has cost the NHS a lot. And we in the marketplace all know that the heroes of the piece are not the dentists, they're the doctors. And in a place where we're trying to save NHS money or place it in one place or another place, it won't be going to the dentists, it'll be going to the doctors. Because we have no ring fencing anymore on dental spend within NHS England. So whilst the NHS gives us the support just now, how long that support is going to continue, I'm not sure. And I'm a believer in the NHS and NHS dentistry, but we've got to look at the mathematics on this. So going back, Julian, to your question, is now a good time to change? If you were going to make the shift, I don't think anything that's happened would stop me from making the shift. But whether I would hold on, because as long as you're in the NHS, you will still have the ability to make any repayments for any overpayments for this cash flow support they've been giving over a longer period of time. If you draw a line and come out completely, you may well lose the ability to repay any money that's due to the NHS over a period of time. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer to the question, I'm afraid, but I would wait for a month. Things will be clearer a month from now. I think things will be clear probably in 2 weeks from now. But a month from now, things will be clearer. And I think we're possibly talking about the timing of leaving the NHS as opposed to whether to leave the NHS, depending on, of course, on your practice and your practice demography.
Okay.
Does that answer? Or go some way towards answering it?
Yeah, I thought one of the things that you said, that the sort of public mood for the NHS doesn't extend to dentistry, and that you feel as if that may at some point have an impact on the way that dentistry is funded. So do you feel that there could be implications a lot further down the line that we don't have any sort of sight of at the moment, but could make it more difficult for NHS dentists?
Yes, I do.
He said thank you very much, by the way, and he said he agrees that timing is key.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Yes, I do believe that. I think NHS dentistry is still valued by NHS England. There's no question about that. And I think politically it's valued. But I think if money is going to be given to GPs or to GDPs, it will go to the GPs first. We'll get what's left.
Okay, that's quite a stark prospect, I think.
Well, it's my view. I've worked in the industry for many years, and I've seen bit by bit and step by step the money being given by the NHS being gradually just eroded, ring-fenced, and I've not seen efforts to prevent wholesale the exit of dentistry to the private sector. All of these things can send a message.
Yeah.
I think it'll be. I don't think it's something that's all of a sudden. Like, for example, I don't think they'll end up saying there's no NHS money for dentistry. And if we were sitting here, Sarah Hurley would be throwing her hands up and saying, no, this is completely not true. Of course, we're going to support NHS dentistry until hell freezes over. But I think there is a whole spectrum of support here, and it's not necessarily 100% or 0%. There's a whole lot of shades of grey in all sorts of areas in between.
Yeah. The sorts of questions, I guess, that your clients are asking you about finance at the moment, what are the things that are bothering them? Is it furlough? Is it cash flow? Is it UDO clawback? What sort of things are you having general conversations about?
The furlough situation and the NHS aspect of the mixed practices to how to furlough and whether or not we're entitled to other support from the government has been something which has been at the forefront of people's minds in mixed practices for the last month.
Okay.
That has largely now been dealt with, although there are still some aspects which I think will cause problems in due course, where people are overclaiming and I suppose not so making up the rules that they feel the rules are, as opposed to the rules that the government and HMRC have imposed, because they are complicated.
So if you do have a sort of 50-50 mixed practice at the moment, what are HMRC saying that you can do in regards to furlough?
You've got to split those employees into proportionately as far as the amount of payroll is that they get paid. So if you had sort of 2 employees on 50,000 each, it's easy. One is furloughed, the other is not able to be furloughed. If you have 3 employees, then technically you should only be furloughing up to 1/2. So technically you can only furlough 1 employee. The other 2 have to stay with the NHS. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because you've got to be reasonable. And that is one thing that we have learned from the CDO's office, is that they are looking at people being reasonable on this. And if people are don't take the mickey, then HMRC won't take the mickey. And
Okay.
I think we've got to work at it from that basis. The more complicated aspects are really to do with people who are on sick pay, people on maternity, people who are going to go on maternity during the period of furlough, and how they are counted within the process. But every practice, every group of people is different. You've got to balance, and each has its own little bits of problems. The main thing that we're thinking about now within practices are, as someone has mentioned earlier, it's to do with the financing of it and the cash flow, and keeping the practice going and alive until we come out of this. And that's where we need the bank help. And some of the banks are being more helpful than others. Some of them are really using it as a way to revisit the banking arrangements that they have. Certainly the bank interest rates and the bank charges for arranging these things are on occasions being ramped up to a level where the bank's going to make out money out of this one way or the other. Despite some of the loans being 80% backed by the government, not a lot of the bounce back loans which were announced this morning, they're 100%, but they still have to be delivered from the bank. And whilst they may well be security free as far as the bank is concerned, I think the banks aren't looking at them as being profit free.
Okay, and has that surprised you? And are there sort of players who some are better than others?
It has in a way, but I think the cynical amongst people would say, no, that's what you would expect to some extent. And there are levels of that where there is a little bit of opportunistic money making out of this. With some of the banks, not with all of them. And it very much depends on the manager, and very much depends on the relationship that we have. So that's an issue at the moment. This is an issue, it's not just about getting some loan capital, loan money coming in. This is much more about the longer term relationship, because we've got a 6 or 9 month cash flow problem, which is going to be coming down the track later on this year. We've delayed the tax payments from July. That's great. Most people will not take that money and put it away, because it has to be paid next January. So there will be some big problems next January, because people will use the tax money, as it were, to help pay their associates, to help pay the overheads and keep the practice running. So the money won't be there next January, and that's where we're the problems.
Yeah, so if you had some advice for any sort of dentistry practice that is doing that and using money that was saved to pay certain tax bills to keep going, what kind of advice would you give them about what do they need to be saying to the revenue? Is there anything that they can do to avoid that hump in the future?
There are some things that a practice could do, and that's there are certain things that you can change within the practice which affect when the tax liabilities arise. Well, we're getting to sort of technical accounting tax work here, so, and I don't want to go there particularly, but you can sort of move your year end around, change some other factors within the business, which squishes the profits from one place to another place, therefore squishes the tax liability from one place to another place. Some of it can be pushed down the track a little bit, and again just smooths everything out. But that means working with your accountant, your tax advisor, sort of basis, to try and project the tax liabilities that you have, because your tax bill is one of the biggest single bills that you have. The other aspect we need to look into this again is look at the equipment and the new stuff that we're going to need to address this brave new world. Now, if you start taking on some new sterilizers, new sterilization equipment, air cleaning equipment, and so on, it's a cost. But it's a cost which can be spread by financing over a period of time, and it can have an immediate effect on your tax bill, depending on when you buy it and where your year end is. So there are a number of things that you can juggle, a number of factors to try and get a handle on what your tax or what your financial profile will look like. Anybody looking forward to this has got to have some sort of a cash flow so they can see the pain coming down the tracks towards them. There's no point in seeing it just when it comes round the bend. And we are in a position now where we know this. There is no reason why we can't look down the track and try and anticipate what's going to happen.
So some advice for people who aren't practicing dentistry at the moment would be actually talk to your tax advisor, have a look at what you might need to do in terms of changing the practice or adapting the practice, and just seeing how you can put all of those pieces together, and then make sure that your sort of outgoings and your tax, that is achievable, and you spread it out for over as long a period as you can.
I think that is good advice. It's very much always good advice.
I think one of the other areas that has been really hit by this is obviously practice sales. So people who are kind of going through the process of either selling and retiring or buying a new practice. What have you seen happening in that area?
I wondered if that question would come up. Speaking to the selling agents, they are pretty much sort of saying there's no change, everything's fine. Practices are still being sold every day, and the values are still being maintained. Anecdotally, I'm not hearing quite that same thing. Anecdotally, I'm hearing of reductions in values of practices, and certainly people not content to go forward with either the sale or a purchase because of the uncertainty. The uncertainty is affecting this. And I have a number of conversations with clients over the last 2 or 3 weeks where they have very much put on hold their retirement for at least 2 years, and indeed are going to start using that time grooming the practice for sale so that it's in the best possible place it can be 2 years from now, whatever the marketplace will be. And that means if you've got an NHS contract, make sure that you've got it on there, make sure you're hitting your targets, making sure that whatever the new arrangements are, you are playing that to your best advantage. It means that if you're a private practice, you are looking at plan income, because plan income is much more easy to borrow against than fee per item. So if you've got a 2-year span to you think, well, I'm going to put this off 2 years. 2 years is enough time to start putting a plan in place and actually getting it to a level where it runs itself quite nicely. It's not just 24 patients. It's sort of more like 500 patients. That's a different sort of an animal. But you've got time to do that. And that's what I'm hearing, a lot of people do that. So whilst the agents are saying, yep, goodwill values are exactly the same, anecdotally, I'm not convinced that will be the case as time goes on. It may well be because there are less people coming to the market.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm interested to see.
Julian Beamish has come back in with another question when we were talking about the tax side of things. And he said, with civil loans seeming quite cheap, is it advisable to borrow as much as possible to consolidate other financing, tax bills and equipment financing?
Julian, I would say yes, that makes sense. If you can get it from the bank, it's a good way to do it. But some of the loans from the bank aren't necessarily cheap. Some of the borrowing as well from the bank is quite short term. It's not long term. So borrowing short term money to pay the long term debt might make it feel better now, but I'm not sure it would feel better later on. Bear in mind that some of the money has got a profile where the interest rates are a certain level, and then they may well take a jump, or they may well be open to change. But as a concept, yes, it does make some sense. I'm not sure about equipment finance, because that's normally done on a 3, 4 or 5 year plan, and it's generally front end loaded. So you've paid all your costs up front, and the amount that you're paying now on a monthly basis, to get rid of that, you've probably already paid all your interest. So to buy yourself out of that agreement probably doesn't make a lot of sense with this money. But for other loans, it's certainly worthwhile looking at.
Okay. Is there any other sort of, are there any other, I guess, refinancing options at the moment? So are you finding that commercial mortgages are cheap, or, I mean, what sort of other things, levers can principals pull to help manage their finances?
Pushing finance out more long-term on a long-term fixed rate is still worth looking at. Long-term fixed rates are as low as they have ever been. However, they're likely to be rising just now. So if you're going to push something off over a period of time, it has to be very soon to get that refinancing into place. It's more, with any of those financing things, it's all about trying to recognize where the problems are likely to come, where they're likely to be, and then react accordingly, and take it up front to your bank. So such as these problems we're having with with maybe a tax payment next January, Also with, if there is clawback payments for NHS for last year, they're paying that back over the course of the year rather than in maybe 3 or 6 months at the end of the year as normal. Similarly, there's going to be the amount of money that the NHS is putting into NHS practices now is by its nature going to be overpaid to practices. So there is going to be a clawback element from the money that practices are getting now.
Mm.
So that has to be repaid as well. It's all about, when working with the bank, it's all about having a really robust plan and knowing when your pinch points are, knowing when the money has to be found, and actually going to the bank with a sensible plan, workable plan, and to see how the best way of financing this is. There isn't always one answer to do that. Private practices have got some more difficulties because they don't have the leaning on for the NHS. But then they don't have they've got more flexibility of what they can do and what they can't do with their patients going forward. If I were a private practice now, I would really be looking down at the demographics of my patients, looking at the sort of treatments I was going to have, looking at what I think the Joe public marketplace will be 6 months from now. And if you're thinking that everybody's going to come out of this, they've all been at home for 3 months, 4 months, there's nothing to spend the money on, and they've got a lot of money, so they're all going to go and spend it on implants and fancy teeth whitening and veneers, then that's the place to be. That's where you want to put your practice.
Mm.
If you don't think that, and you think people are going to be really worried and be saving up and not spending anything, then going heavy on with your marketing as being, come and spend 3,000-5,000 a year on per treatment on this or this or this, then that's not the marketplace you want to be. A private practice, I think you need to be looking at what the public is going to be buying from you and trying to organize your practice accordingly and put yourself in that place to be the person who can provide what the public want.
What's your feeling about sort of demand for dentistry? What is that going to be when we come out of?
I think there will still the dentists are held in high regard by the public. I think people have realised, probably not being able to see a dentist for 3 months, but they're actually maybe realising this is a good healthcare product that I have, and they maybe value dentists do a little bit more. And I think dentists will come out of this in the public's eyes pretty well. That's quite different to what the NHS pays dentists. That's a different thing. But I think dentists have showed themselves in a very good light on this. And I think in a practice, again, this is part of the communication with your patients, whether you're NHS or private. Over this period of time, this is the time where you can make a difference to your patients, how they see you in their eyes about you, about the caring profession that there are. And again, that's part of the things that when we open our practices again, how we open them, how we get it across to the patients and the potential patients, how we're looking after them, how we're looking after our staff, and how dentistry is important, and it's really quite a crucial thing to have that health support there. And I think there are opportunities when we go back to work as well to really replace that's a place the surgery, the clinic at the heart of the community. And from that perspective, I think that's going to help the view and people's idea of dentistry. The more people have it's in their perception that they need a dentist and they should see a dentist, that's good for dentistry as a whole, surely.
So I think you were saying earlier that you felt as if the government would sort of put the money towards perhaps the GPs and hospital doctors, but actually you're saying that dentistry as a whole could have some benefit as a sort of as the feeling around the NHS and the value for the NHS services. So people will value being part of that and that being in their community more.
I agree, and not just NHS, but also private dentistry as well. And people will value the service that the clinic provides.
Okay, I think it's probably about time to round up. But before we do, is there anything that you feel that we haven't covered that's sort of very financially pertinent for dentists at the moment?
I think there's the changes that we've got coming in this next month are to do with, on the NHS side, it's to do with the negotiations which are taking place right now of what the NHS provision, the NHS support will be to practices during this period of lockdown. And I think if we keep our eye on that, is something which is sensible. How we come out of that within the NHS, I think we've got to keep close to that and keep an eye on that without jumping up and down and waving all the flags. That doesn't necessarily achieve much with the powers that be. That's NHS dentistry. Private dentistry must also keep one eye on this too, because we're all paddling about in the same pool, and the ripples in one place also have an effect elsewhere of people moving towards private or people re-holding onto their NHS contracts. And I think that's something we need to do. The private, well, I suppose every dentist, I think, just needs to keep an eye on what the public at large and their public at large is thinking, because that will very much affect how they reopen their practice. And you've got to get into the minds of your patients and your demography of where you are to do that properly, because there will be, it's a dislocation now, and that dislocation will continue as we move away from lockdown.
And then I suppose practices need to be able to bridge that gap in a really human, empathetic way.
Very much so.
To connect with their patients.
Very
That's
much.
Great. Johnny, thank you very much for all your wise words and advice, and thank you to everybody who's joined the call and asked their questions. Take care, and we'll say goodbye now.
Thank you.